At a small diner on the outskirts of Brooksville, a black waitress is struggling to make ends meet. But when a mother and her two children sit down for a rare meal and their card is declined, she doesn't hesitate to pay the bill, even though it means making her own financial situation even worse in the days ahead. What she doesn't know is that this act of kindness will lead her to meet a powerful man who will help change her life. At 26, Tiana Hayes was no stranger to long hours and aching feet, working double shifts as a waitress at Maple Street Diner, a cozy but aging little restaurant tucked between a rundown bookstore and an old laundromat in the small town of Brooksville, Georgia. She had grown up here, watched the town shift in slow, almost imperceptible ways. New businesses would pop up only to close within a year, and old buildings sagged a little more each season, their bricks worn and weathered like the people who lived here. But nothing had changed as much as her own life. The carefree days of childhood spent running barefoot through the back streets were long gone, replaced with bills, stress, and the unrelenting weight of trying to survive on a waitress's wages. Her studio apartment, just a few blocks away from the diner, was as modest as they came peeling wallpaper. A draft that seeped through the old window frames, and a radiator that rattled when the wind howled too hard outside. But it was hers, and as long as she could pay rent at the end of the month, she could deal with a few cold nights. The problem was, rent was due in 5 days, and she was still $50 short. Tips had been inconsistent lately, and no matter how many extra shifts she picked up, it never seemed to be enough. Between utilities, groceries, and the small sum she desperately tried to save for her dream attending nursing school, there was barely a penny left over. But tonight, like every night, she pushed those worries aside the second she walked through the diner's door. The worn-out bell above the entrance jingled as she stepped inside, the familiar smell of grease and brewed coffee filling the air. She forced a bright, practiced smile as she tied her apron around her waist. The Maple Street Diner wasn't glamorous, but it had its charm, the kind of place where truckers and retirees mixed with tired moms and high school kids looking for a cheap meal. The neon sign flickered above the counter. The cracked leather booths groaned under the weight of their occupants, and the scent of burgers and fries carried a strange kind of comfort. It was a Wednesday evening, slow but steady, with a handful of regulars nursing their usual orders. Tiana had just refilled an elderly man's coffee when the door swung open, and a woman walked in with 2 small children. The woman, in her mid-30s, had tired eyes but a warm, gentle smile as she held her kids' hands and guided them toward a booth by the window. The little boy, maybe 6 years old, bounced excitedly at the smell of food, while his younger sister, no more than 4, clutched a stuffed rabbit that looked like it had seen better days. Tiana grabbed her notepad and made her way over, her usual cheer in place. "Hey there, welcome to Maple Street Diner. My name's Tiana. What can I get for you all tonight?" She kept her voice light, her tone welcoming. The woman glanced at the menu, her fingers tracing the edges of the laminated pages, her smile still present but noticeably strained. "We'll start with 2 kids' meals," she said after a moment, her voice polite but hesitant. "And for me, just coffee, please." Tiana felt something in her chest tighten. She had seen this before. Families treating themselves to a rare night out, carefully calculating each order, choosing the cheapest option for themselves so their children could eat. It hit close to home. Her own mother had done the same thing years ago, working 2 jobs to keep food on the table after her father had left. They never ate out, and when they did, it had been special, tinged with a quiet, unspoken awareness of the cost. Still, she kept her expression neutral, offering a reassuring smile. "Coming right up," she said, jotting down the order before heading back to the counter. As the children played with the crayons and napkins on the table, giggling as they turned them into makeshift toys, Tiana couldn't help but steal a glance every now and then. They looked so happy, so unaware of whatever struggles their mother was facing. Olivia, the name the woman had given when placing her order, watched them with soft eyes, her exhaustion momentarily overshadowed by love. Tiana knew that look. She had seen it in her mother's eyes every time she tucked her into bed after working a 16-hour shift. Every time she let her take the last piece of food on the plate. By the time Tiana brought over their food, she had slipped an extra side of ketchup onto the tray. Something small, but enough to make a difference in a meal that was already being stretched to its limit. She didn't linger at the table, but she noticed how Olivia barely touched her coffee, focusing instead on making sure her kids ate. When the plates were cleared, and the check was placed on the table, Tiana saw the shift in Olivia's expression, the way her shoulders tensed, how she hesitated before reaching for her purse. The low murmur of a whispered conversation passed between her and her oldest child, and then the boy pulled out a small, battered wallet. Tiana didn't mean to overhear, but she caught the words it's declined. Olivia's face flushed with embarrassment, her fingers gripping the edge of the table as she exhaled shakily. She looked up at Tiana, her expression a mixture of apology and humiliation. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I thought I had enough on this card. Let me." Tiana held up a hand gently. "It's okay," she said before Olivia could even finish her sentence. Her voice was soft but firm, leaving no room for argument. "I've got it." Olivia's eyes widened. No, I can't let you do that," she protested, immediately shaking her head. "We'll figure something out, I just—" "Really?" Tiana interrupted with a small smile. "It's on me." For a second, Olivia just stared at her, completely taken aback. Her lips parted slightly as if she wanted to argue, but she seemed at a loss for words. Slowly, her eyes shone with something deep and unspoken, a mix of gratitude and disbelief. "Thank you," she finally breathed, her voice choked with emotion. I'll pay you back, I promise." Tiana just shook her head. "Just pay it forward when you can." When Olivia and her children left that night, she did so with tearful thanks, and Tiana returned to the counter, her emotions a swirl of joy and worry. The $40 tab was a significant hit to her already strained budget. She glanced at the tip jar, knowing it wouldn't make up for the expense, but she didn't regret it, because something about that family's happiness had been worth every penny. As she walked home under the dim glow of the streetlights later that night, the familiar pang of doubt crept into her chest. Had she done the right thing? Would she regret being generous when she could barely afford to be? But then she remembered Olivia's grateful eyes, her son's laughter, the quiet promise to pay it forward. Despite everything, Tiana smiled. She might not have much, but tonight she had enough to help someone else. The next day night at the diner, Tiana received a message she hadn't expected. Olivia Monroe had asked to meet her at Riverside Cafe, a small coffee shop just outside of downtown Brooksville. The request had surprised her, but curiosity had won over hesitation. Now, as she pushed open the glass door and stepped inside, she felt the warmth of freshly brewed coffee and soft jazz music washing over her. Her eyes scanned the room, searching for Olivia, and she found her sitting at a table by the window. The morning light framed her face, making her look even softer than she had at the diner, less burdened. But it wasn't just Olivia that caught Tiana's attention, it was the man sitting across from her. Tall, broad-shouldered, and sharply dressed, he carried himself with a quiet but undeniable authority. Even in a relaxed setting like this, he had the aura of someone who made decisions that changed lives. His watch gleamed subtly under the sunlight, and his tailored blazer sat perfectly against his frame, the kind of effortless wealth that swelled their volumes without saying a word. Tiana hesitated for a second before Olivia caught sight of her, and waved her over with a warm smile. "Tiana," she greeted, standing slightly as Tiana approached. "I'm so glad you could make it." Tiana nodded, cautiously sliding into the seat across from them. The man turned his gaze on her, his sharp eyes assessing, not in a way that was dismissive, but in a way that made her feel like he was measuring her character before even speaking a word. He extended his hand, and when he spoke, his voice was calm, confident. "Tiana Hayes. I'm Andrew Monroe." Tiana took his hand, shaking it firmly, though she couldn't shake the feeling that she was somehow out of place in this polished setting. Andrew nodded slightly, as if confirming something to himself, before glancing at Olivia. She inhaled deeply, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee cup before she looked back at Tiana, her expression sincere, touched, and almost reverent. "I haven't been able to stop thinking about what you did for us," Olivia admitted. "I wanted to meet you again because I needed to understand. I needed to know who you are, the kind of person who would step in for a stranger without hesitation, who would give when she didn't have much to give." Tiana felt a twinge of discomfort, not because she regretted what she had done, but because she had never expected this level of attention. She wasn't used to being seen in this way, let alone by people like them. She cleared her throat, offering a small shrug. "It wasn't that big of a deal," she murmured, stirring her untouched coffee. Andrew's gaze sharpened slightly, as if he caught the deflection. "Wasn't it?" His voice was even, but there was something pointed about the way he said it. You covered a meal for someone you didn't know, despite the fact that you're struggling yourself. I'd say that's a big deal. Tiana glanced at Olivia, whose eyes were filled with something that looked suspiciously close to admiration. A moment of silence stretched between them before Olivia spoke again, softer this time. I'd like to know more about you, Tiana. Tiana hesitated, unsure how much to share. But there was something disarming about the way Olivia and Andrew looked at her, like they weren't just being polite, like they actually wanted to understand. So she told them. She told them about the small apartment, the peeling wallpaper, the heat that barely worked in the winter. She told them about working double shifts, about how no matter how hard she pushed herself, it never seemed to be enough. She told them about her mother, about watching her struggle, watching her sacrifice everything just to make sure Tiana had food on the table. And finally she told them about her dream, how she had always wanted to be a nurse, how she had imagined herself in scrubs, caring for people the way no one had cared for her mother when she was sick. But school was expensive, and dreams cost money. Money she didn't have. By the time she finished, Olivia's eyes had turned glassy with emotion. Andrew, however, remained silent, his fingers lightly tapping against the ceramic of his coffee cup. His expression was thoughtful, unreadable, but Tiana could feel the weight of his gaze, as if he was calculating something, reaching a decision before he even spoke it aloud. Then he took a slow sip of his coffee, placed the cup down gently, and met her eyes with unwavering intensity. Tiana, he said, voice calm but heavy with meaning, I'm not just Olivia's brother. I own Maple Street Diner, the place you work at. Tiana froze. The air in her lungs stalled, her fingers tightening around the coffee cup. Did she hear that right? Andrew Monroe, CEO of Monroe Hospitality Group. Her boss's boss's boss. The shock must have been evident on her face because Olivia reached over, touching her hand lightly. I didn't tell you at the diner because I didn't want it to change anything, she admitted softly. I wanted to meet you like this first, without anything else in the way. Tiana opened her mouth, but no words came out. This wasn't what she had expected. Andrew studied her reaction carefully, then leaned forward slightly, placing a white envelope on the table between them. This is for you, he said. Tiana hesitated before reaching for it. The paper was thick beneath her fingertips, smooth, professional. She unfolded it slowly, her breath catching when she saw what was inside. A check for $5,000. But more than that, another piece of paper, one that made her heart stop entirely. Nursing scholarship application, sponsored by Monroe Hospitality Group. She looked up at Andrew, stunned, speechless. What is this? Andrew's expression remained steady, but there was genuine warmth in his eyes now. A chance. Tiana's throat tightened, her fingers trembling slightly as she held the papers. This will cover the cost of getting you into a program, Andrew continued. But you'll have to prove yourself. If you're serious about becoming a nurse, we'll support you. We'll help you make it happen. For a moment, Tiana couldn't breathe. This wasn't just money, this was an open door, a door she had never thought she'd get the chance to walk through. I don't know what to say, she whispered, her voice barely holding steady. Andrew offered the faintest of smiles, something firm yet encouraging. You don't have to say anything. Just promise me one thing. Tiana swallowed hard, forcing herself to meet his gaze. What? Andrew leaned back slightly, his expression calm but certain. Promise me you won't give up. Tiana felt something crack open inside her, something deep, something raw. A part of her that had been holding on to nothing but survival for so long suddenly saw something more, a future, a possibility, a way out. And for the first time in years, she let herself believe. Tiana sat there, the white envelope still in her trembling hands, her mind struggling to process the moment. The words nursing scholarship stared back at her, foreign yet intoxicating, like something belonging to someone else, someone whose dreams weren't just idle fantasies. Her throat was dry, her pulse unsteady. This couldn't be real. It couldn't be happening to her. She looked up, meeting Andrew Monroe's gaze. His expression was calm, steady, like he had already made peace with whatever decision she was going to make. Olivia watched her with quiet encouragement, her fingers curled around her coffee cup, but Tiana saw the emotion in her eyes. She wasn't just offering gratitude, she was offering belief. Her voice came out hoarse, barely above a whisper. Why? Andrew leaned back slightly, hands folded over the table. Because you deserve a chance, Tiana. His voice was even, but there was something undeniable in the way he said it, something that sent a shiver down her spine. You work hard. You put others before yourself, even when you don't have much to give. That's the kind of person who should be out there making a difference. That's the kind of person I want to invest in. Tiana blinked rapidly, her vision blurring. No one had ever said anything like that to her before. No one had ever looked at her and seen potential instead of struggle. She swallowed hard, gripping the envelope like it might slip through her fingers. I don't know if I can do this. Andrew exhaled, tilting his head slightly as he studied her. What exactly do you think you can't do? She let out a small, shaky laugh, but there was no humor in it. All of it. School, balancing work, not failing. She looked down at the papers again, her hands tightening around them. I haven't been in a classroom in years. What if I'm not good enough? What if I waste this chance? Andrew's expression didn't waver. He reached for his coffee, took a slow sip, and then set it down before speaking. Let me tell you something I've learned, Tiana. The people who succeed, they're not always the smartest. They're not always the most talented. But they're the ones who don't quit. She inhaled sharply, his words hitting her harder than she expected. You've already done the hardest part, he continued. You've survived. You've kept going. You've held on to hope even when life tried to beat it out of you. You think passing some classes and working a little harder is going to be the thing that stops you. His lips quirked slightly. You're tougher than that. Tiana felt something tighten in her chest, something raw and vulnerable. She wanted to believe him, but fear still clung to her ribs like a vice. Olivia reached across the table, touching her hand lightly. You don't have to do this alone, she said softly. I know what it's like to be stuck, to feel like the world is too big and you're too small to change anything. But people believed in me when I needed it most. Now it's my turn to believe in you. Tiana's grip on the envelope faltered. She had spent so long carrying everything alone, believing that no one was coming to save her. But maybe she didn't have to do it alone. She took a breath, shaky but determined, and met Andrew's gaze once more. If I take this, I won't quit. A flicker of approval passed through his eyes. Good. She exhaled, finally allowing herself to unclench her fists. The weight of her doubts didn't disappear, but it shifted, making room for something else, something terrifying, but real. Hope. The next few weeks were a blur of movement and change, a reality Tiana hadn't let herself believe in now taking form in front of her. She submitted the scholarship application, went through the interview process with Monroe Hospitality's board, and when the acceptance letter arrived, she held it in her hands for a full 5 minutes before she could even breathe. The first day of nursing school was surreal. She sat in a classroom full of eager students, some fresh out of high school, others like her adults chasing a dream they had almost let go of. She worked at the diner in the evenings, pouring coffee and wiping down tables, but something was different now. Every shift, every hour she spent on her feet wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about a future. But it wasn't easy. The coursework was brutal, the long hours of studying stretching into exhaustion. Some nights, she barely had time to sleep between shifts and lectures. There were moments she doubted herself, moments where the weight of everything pressed too hard against her chest. One night, as she sat in her tiny apartment, books spread out in front of her, her eyes burning from lack of sleep, she reached for her phone and hesitated before dialing a number. Olivia answered after the second ring. Tiana? She didn't even realize her voice was shaking. I don't know if I can do this. There was silence on the other end, followed by a steady, reassuring breath. You can, Olivia said, firm and unwavering. And you will. Tiana closed her eyes. She wanted to believe that. Look, Olivia continued, voice softer now. No one ever said it was going to be easy. But the best things, the things worth fighting for, they never are. Tiana let out a quiet, trembling breath. You didn't come this far just to turn back now, Olivia reminded her. You're not alone in this. Tiana swallowed the lump in her throat, her grip tightening around the phone. And for the first time in weeks, the doubt didn't feel so suffocating. Part 5. Becoming the Change, 700-900 words. 3 years later, Tiana stood in a crisp white uniform, the nursing pin gleaming against the fabric of her scrubs. The graduation ceremony was a blur of applause, of handshakes, of crossing the stage with her heart in her throat. When she scanned the crowd, she spotted them immediately: Olivia, sitting beside Andrew, both of them clapping proudly. As she made her way through the crowd after the ceremony, Olivia pulled her into a tight hug, her voice thick with emotion. "You did it." Tiana laughed, breathless, overwhelmed. "We did it." Andrew extended a hand, his expression satisfied, approving. "I told you," he said simply. "You're tougher than you think." Tiana shook his hand, blinking back tears. "Thank you for believing in me." His lips quirked. "You did all the work. I just gave you the push." A week later, Tiana walked through the doors of Brooksville General Hospital, her heart racing but her step steady. Her first official shift as a nurse. She adjusted the ID badge clipped to her scrubs, took a deep breath, and stepped forward. Near the end of her shift, she noticed a woman in the waiting room, her young daughter clutching her hand. The woman looked nervous, exhausted, the same look Tiana had seen on Olivia that night in the diner. Tiana knelt down, smiling softly at the child. "Hey there, sweetheart. You're safe here, okay?" She turned to the mother, her voice gentle. "We'll take good care of you." And as the mother's shoulders relaxed, as gratitude filled her eyes, Tiana realized something. The kindness she had given that night in the diner. It had come back to her in ways she never could have imagined. And now it was her turn to pass it forward. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.